Bir de lord var. Lordlar var.
Tabii.
Ne yapalım? Lordlara bir gidelim mi Ergun?
Gidelim.
Zamanı geldi mi?
Tabii.
Geldi.
Kesin.
Evet sevgili seyirciler. Adam ekonomik tetikçi.
İşi bu.
İşi bu. Şirketler adına gitmediği ülke kalmamış. Venezuela'dan
Ekvator'a kadar.
Irak'a, Ekvador'a kadar.
Suudi Arabistan'a kadar.
Gitmiş Suudi Arabistan'a kadar. Demiş ki başkanlara şu kadar para ülkeni bize sat. Satan satmış, satmayana
İndirilmiş.
çakallar gönderilmiş. İşte o ekonomik tetikçi devlet başkanlarıyla ülkelerini satması için pazarlık yapan John Perkins İstanbul'daydı ve
Bize
sadece
geldi.
Yazboz'a konuştu. Çakalların önünde giden adam John Perkins ve baronlar ve baronların bağlı olduğu kaledeki, şatodaki şövalyelerin korumasındaki lord.
İyi izleyin lütfen.
İzliyoruz.
İyi izleyin.
Do that, there will be no passage. I had to learn that from personal experience. With these loans that we were making to the famous one because it was corroborators who dig beneath the surface. You know, Tokyo, this is like me, and the system is much different than London because of these things.
Hangi şirketler adına ekonomik tetikçi olarak görev yaptınız?
Well, I really worked for one company, Charles T. Main, which was a consulting firm in Boston. We had about 2,000 employees. My title was chief economist. I had about 50 people working for me. And we were a very powerful consulting firm, but not well known at all. We were very undercover, so to speak. We were legal, but we stayed out of the limelight. And as a consulting firm, we worked for many other corporations. But a lot of my work was for the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the Asian Development Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, and a lot of big banks.
Peki dünyaya egemen olan finans baronlarını, patronlarını ne zaman fark ettiniz?
You know, it's interesting because when I went to business school and studied economics, you know, we studied classical economics, supply and demand curves and all of this sort of thing. And I believe that I was taught that a way to help a developing country develop was to invest a lot of money into infrastructure, power plants, industrial parks, highways. Then when I got out in the business world and started doing this, at the beginning I believed that was all correct. But the more I got into it, the more I understood that really what it was about was creating a new type of empire that was run by the big business barons, what we call the corporatocracy. But that wasn't ever taught in schools, and it still isn't. I had to learn that from personal experience, so I did it as I was on the job. I began to understand that these loans that we were making to these countries really weren't helping the countries at all. They were helping our own businesses, especially some of the big wealthy families, the famous 1%, which is really more like 0.0001%. And they were not helping the people in these countries at all. They were just a few wealthy people that were corroborators with the 1%, with the corporatocracy. But that's never taught, and I had to dig beneath the surface to really understand that.
Büyük Britanya Finans İmparatorluğu için ne düşünüyorsunuz?
Fascinating, this whole concept that in recent times we know that the control of LIBOR and the control of many of the indices has come out of London, and we're seeing this now with the devaluation here in Turkey, the control that the London banking system has. But you know, it's coming through London, but those banks are also very closely tied with the U.S. Federal Reserve and Wall Street. So there's this very tight family there of people that control the big banks, whether it's in New York or London or Hong Kong in the past, you know, Tokyo. There's this system, and it seems to these days be funneled through London more than anywhere else. But that's just, to me, I believe that's just the funneling point. And the system is much greater than that. It's like an octopus. And so you might say that the head of the octopus is in London, but the tentacles reach out everywhere.
İngiltere eski başbakanı Tony Blair neden ben Katolik oldum dedikten sonra istifa etti? Orada bir mesaj mı vardı?
Well, I think it's hard for me to speak to that because I don't have any personal experience there. But I think Blair, in a way, overextended himself. He made some tactical mistakes. And at the same time, things were falling apart around the world. We had the recession going on. And I think, in a way, I believe that Blair got burned out. I think he had enough, personally. I think he was ready to get out. And I think the announcement of him being Catholic was part of his plan just to make himself less attractive. I really think Blair was tired. I also think there was a lot of pressure being put on him to get out because he'd become quite controversial, maybe a little too controversial.
Rockefeller ve Rothschild aileleri sizin için neyi ifade ediyor, neyi çağrıştırıyor?
Well, we know that they've been very powerful for many years and continue to be very powerful. I am not a person who really buys into the conspiracy theory, the Bilderberger theory, this theory that there's a few people that control everything. I know the Bilderberger group exists. There's no question. They have a lot of power. There's no question about that. But I believe that the system is a little bit more complex than that. So while the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds do have a great deal of power, including controlling a lot of the banking interests, and being involved with the Federal Reserve in the United States, I also think that a lot of the power simply comes from the fact that corporations today, all of the big corporations, are driven by this one policy of maximizing profits regardless of the social and environmental costs. And they don't actually have to get together and conspire, the heads of the companies don't have to get together and conspire to do anything illegal. There doesn't have to be a conspiracy. But what happens when any law is threatened to be passed in any powerful country, or in any country for that matter, the corporations come together. So Nike and Reebok may compete for our dollars in the store, but if there's a law that comes up, whether it's in Turkey or in the United States, that threatens their ability to maximize profits, they become partners. And they bring their lobbyists to bear, and they bring their money to bear to make sure that law doesn't happen. Also, we might say that Chevron and Exxon or Shell compete for to sell you gas at the gas pump. But if there's a law that's threatening their profits anywhere in the world, they'll all come together and organize. And I think it's very interesting, in the United States in the last few years, we've had what we call stalemate in the Congress, where Congress can't vote on anything. That's intentional. So the big corporations and the corporatocracy finance both the Republicans and the Democrats. And they tell the Democrats to vote yes on a certain bill, and they tell the Republicans to vote no, knowing that if they do that, there will be no passage of any new laws. The existing laws favor the corporatocracy, so to a certain degree, the stonewalling, the stopping any passage in Congress of any progressive laws works to their advantage. They want that to happen. They want our Congress in the United States basically to be impotent, emasculated, to not have any power, to not be able to make decisions, because right now the laws favor them and they don't want to see that change. And go on further to say, I think we're seeing something similar in Europe, that the big corporations do not want a strong European Union. They do not want a strong European Union. You want to talk to incidentally, this is where you want this theory that there's a few people that control everything. Corporations today, and they don't actually have, the corporations come together, and they bring their lobby, and they bring their money to bear to make peace for years anywhere in the world. They're all subject.
International Bank of Settlements hakkındaki düşünceleriniz nedir? JP Morgan, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Citigroup, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley gerçekten dünyanın devi midir? Arkasındaki güç kim ve ne istiyorlar? Bankaların pozisyonu ne dünyadaki savaşlarda?
Wow. All of the investment groups and banks that you mentioned are very, very powerful. And what they want is to control the world, nothing less. And they've been working to do that for a long time. And they work very closely with the big oil companies, the big chemical companies, all the other big corporations, what I call the corporatocracy, to create a global empire. And they've been pretty successful. So, for the first time in history, we really have a truly global empire. It's not an American empire. It's not a national empire. It's a corporate empire. These big corporations are controlling the planet, are trying to. And there's increasing resistance going on. So they haven't quite succeeded. No empire has ever totally succeeded. There's always resistance, and usually the empires collapse. So I think we can expect that this one probably will too. But this is their intent. And the big banks, the big investment houses are, in a way, the catalyst, the guiding power behind this move. Other corporations are also very much involved. Big agribusiness, the big oil companies, the big chemical companies, some of the big merchandising and retail companies. But the driving force always is money. And so the big investment houses and banks have a tremendous amount of power here. And truly, their goal is nothing less than creating an empire. And I was part of that as an economic hitman, the idea being that we could now, for the first time in history, create an empire without using the military for the most part. So in the past, empires were always created through military power. And they were always justified by some lofty ideal. Spreading Islam, spreading Christianity, spreading civilization, whatever. There was always this lofty ideal, but this new empire, and so these old empires sent their armies out to conquer other people, to spread the good things, the religion, the ideals, whatever, Catholicism, But in recent times, the ideal has been what we call democracy and capitalism, which are just watchwords. The real truth is to spread the power of a very few people who run these big corporations. And as we saw a couple of weeks ago, the news came out, it was very highly recorded in the United States, I don't know about Turkey, but that 85 individuals own more assets than half the world's population. So that's been the goal, and they've achieved it to a very large degree. It's a feudal system. It's like the old castles, where the lord sat in the castle and he had a few knights, and below him were all the serfs, the bourgeoisie, the bourge people, the people who lived in the bourges. And suddenly the lord of the castle told these people who've lived on this land and farmed the land and made things from the land for years, they were suddenly told, you don't own the land. The Lord owns the land, and He'll let you use it, but you've got to give 80% of all your produce to the Lord. If you don't, His knights will come in and kill you, or they won't protect you from the knights from the other castles who will attack you. We're experiencing that same system today. But today, the castle is the world, and there's a few people who are sitting on top, and they're saying, hey, we'll take care of you. We're the Lord. You're all bourgeoisie, but pay us taxes, work for us for very little pay, give us your resources, and if you do that, we'll protect you. From who? Basically protect you from us. And I think the world is beginning to wake up to this now. The banks that you mentioned are sitting at the top of the castle. And, you know, we're beginning to wake up and we're beginning to chip away at the castle. That's what...
Türkiye'ye gelen ekonomik tetikçi tanıyor musunuz?
No. I never worked in Turkey personally. I worked in Iran, I worked in Kuwait, I worked in Saudi Arabia, I worked in countries around here, but I never worked in Turkey itself. And so I have no personal experience. I have no doubt that there were a lot of economic hitmen here, and still are. And jackals too, probably, but I personally cannot speak to that because I don't have any personal experience in this country. My only experience in this country has been very pleasant. As a speaker and as a guest and as a tourist and as somebody who comes to conferences, but I have not ever worked here as an economic hitman.
Kemal Derviş adı size neyi çağrıştırıyor?
I'm not sure who that is.
Ankara, Arap sermayesinin akışını Londra'dan Türkiye'ye çevirebilir mi?
Difficult. Difficult. I think you can siphon some of the money off and have it go to Ankara, but let's face it, I mean, the British have such a long history in the United States and Europe here that it's certainly a tug of war, and you know how much of that capital can Ankara get, I really don't know. But I will say this, I think it's well worth trying. I think the balance of power needs to switch. One of the great things 2.5 years ago when I was first here in Turkey that I kept hearing from other people from the Middle East is that Turkey was a model. Turkey was serving as a model for so much of the Middle East. I think that's been hurt recently by the scandals that have occurred here in the current administration. The corruption and the demonstrations have in a way upset that balance, at least temporarily. But I do believe that Turkey is in a position where it can take on much more of the power, but you have to straighten out your internal affairs first. Somehow, Turkey has to come to grips with this imbalance right now that's going on, this apparent war between the government and certain corporations, between different factions within Turkey. If Turkey can stabilize its politics more, then I think Turkey's in an amazing position to be a leader in the Middle East. And personally, I'd really like to see that happen. It's been way too long that London and other parts of Europe and the United States have had way too great of an interest here in the Middle East and too much power. The power needs to switch to the Middle East, and I think Turkey would make a wonderful place for that to happen. I think Turkey's in a magnificent position. You have an amazingly strong economic base over the years. You have a great reputation. You have extremely hard-working people. You have a reputation for that. Extremely talented people, extremely well-educated people here. You're the bridge between Europe and Asia. I mean, quite literally, the geographical location, the strategic location that you're in. Everything comes together to indicate that Turkey needs to be and can be and should be a great leader in this area, as it was in the past, as it has been, as it's had this history. But in order for that to happen, Turkey's going to have to straighten out its own internal affairs.
Dikkatle izliyoruz.
Do that, there will be no passage. I had to learn that from personal experience. With these loans that we were making to the famous wonderful that were corroborated and dig beneath the surface. You know, Tokyo, this is me, and the system is much different than London. The difficulty.
Mr. Perkins, Türkiye'nin en büyük holdinglerinden birinin patronu IMF'in Türkiye'ye çağrılması için çağrılar yaptı. Bu normal mi? IMF'i çağırmalı mıyız?
Well, that'll undermine the government. So Koch is asking to get the IMF involved because getting the IMF involved will undermine the government. The IMF is a robber baron. The IMF comes in as a last resort, basically. You know, the IMF is going to ask Turkey to sell off more of its public sector industries and businesses. You've already done this. You've sold off your communication system and your liquors and so on and so forth. Privatization. The IMF always wants privatization because it wants the big corporations to come in and take control. The IMF is a tool of the corporatocracy, and so and Koch is part of the corporatocracy, and he's opposing the Erdogan administration. So it makes total sense to me that he would want the IMF to get involved. The government should not want IMF to get involved. The people should not want IMF to get involved, because the IMF is going to rip you off. It's going to steal from you. That's what the IMF does. That's what they do so well. You know, the greatest success stories right now in dealing with the IMF, the current greatest success stories are Iceland and Ecuador. Both of those countries have refused to pay what the IMF says they owe. Huge amounts of money. I don't remember what it is in Iceland, but in Ecuador it's $3.5 billion. Both of these countries refused to pay. They said, we're not paying that money, we don't owe it. The IMF basically struck a deal with former leaders in these countries that were illegal leaders. They did not reflect a democratic decision to accept the money. They accepted the money. President of Ecuador, Rafael Correa, says this money was signed, these deals were signed by a military junta that was put into power here by the CIA. John Perkins was here at the time, economic hitman, convinced the junta to take out these loans. I've become good friends with Rafael Correa. In a way, we've corresponded. And he says, my people, the Ecuadorian people, don't owe this money. The IMF owes the money. The military junta owes the money, but they've all died or gone to live in Miami. And maybe John Perkins owes the money. But my people don't owe the money. Iceland's saying something similar. And this is how you have to deal with the IMF. We're not paying. Wherever I go, I give this advice. I gave it in Iceland, and Iceland listened, and they passed a referendum by over 90% of the population, don't pay the money. I advised the Irish people. I was on a speaking tour of Ireland not too long ago. I advised them, don't pay. They took a referendum and they voted to pay. They didn't listen to me. Although I've actually heard that it was probably a rigged vote. I've heard that probably the Irish people did vote not to pay, but the polls were rigged. I don't know. My advice to Turkey is don't take on any IMF loans. Don't take on any World Bank loans. And don't pay your debts if they're taken on by people that don't represent you, the people. The only time loans like this should be taken on is if the whole country agrees in some vote. Almost never will a country agree to that.
Evet Ergun, IMF hırsız bir barondur diyor.
Değil mi? Bak bunu ilk defa söylüyor.
İlk defa ve soyup soğana çevirir, en iyi yaptığı iş budur diyor.
Evet. AK Parti Erdoğan'da IMF'i kovarsa başına da bunlar gelir demek istiyor. Değil mi?
Evet.
Bu yani.
Sonuçta baktığımızda borçlu bir ülke olmamız lazım IMF'e. Borçlu olursak adam gönderiyorlar.
Tabii.
Amerikalılar Ekonomi Bakanlığı'ndan her yere giriyorlar. Ekonomiyle ilgili bütün kararları onlar alıyorlar. Ne zamana kadar? Borcun bitene kadar. Kaç senede bitirirsen. Yani sonuçta ekonomi yönetimi müdahil hep Amerikalılar oluyor. Ne zaman bunları kovuyorsun, bağımsızlık yakaladığın anda tak olaylar, ekonomik kriz çıksın, tekrar borç alalım, tekrar yerleşsinler.
Aynen.
Gitmek istedikleri nokta aslında bu.
Yani ordularla, süngülerle, tanklarla, tüfeklerle gelip Bekir. Bankalarla, paralarla geliniyor. Paran olmadığı zaman içtiğin çayın hesabını ödeyemezsin. Bu da özgürlüğün yoktur anlamına gelir. Bu kadar açık ve net.
Çay ısmarlayacak birilerinin yüzüne bakarsın.
O çayı içmek için de eğilip bükülmek zorundasın. Onun dediklerini yapmak zorundasın. Karnını doyurmak için hazır ol da beklemek zorundasın. Böyle bir Türkiye istiyorlar. Biz de buna itiraz ediyoruz. Sadece bizi. Ülkenin tamamı neredeyse. O itiraz edenler, bize itiraz edenler azınlık. sesleri çok çıkıyor olabilir ama azınlık. Bu ülkenin çocukları buna itiraz ediyor. Ne diyor? İtiraz edin diyor. Doğru söylüyor. Kim? Tetikçi. Yapmayın diyor. IMF gidiyor, bütün solun, bak bunu parti kimliğini bırakarak düşünsünler. Bütün solun Erdoğan'ın yanında olması gerekirken sol geziye çıkıyor. Ya IMF'i kovan adamın yanında olmak zorunda değil misiniz siz? Sol bunu emretmiyor mu?
Ama IMF gelsin diyenler oradaydı. Taksim'deydi. IMF gelsin
IMF
çağrı yapar.
O pasyonları açıyordu.
IMF'den biz
Ben de çapulcuyum
borcu
diye.
bitirdik. Çıktılar. Ya IMF'den biraz daha borç alalım dedi sermaye
Ya.
Türkiye'de.
Tabii.
Şirketler
Ne
söylüyor.
diyor adam?
Evet.
Alırsan diyor ülkeni kaybedersin,
Kaybedersin diyor.
Kim diyor borç alalım? Diyenler belli.
Ve solcular IMF gelsin diyen sermayeyle yan yana. Ya eskiden solcular kahrolsun IMF diye yürürdü.
Bunlara karşı değil mi sola?
Ergun solcu biziz. Onlar başka bir şey oldu.
Cidden.
Ben sana söyleyeyim
Yani gelinen nokta bu.
Gelinen nokta bu.
İşte burası böyle bir coğrafya.
Ben zaman zaman diyorum ya benim ideolojim mi değişti? Ben solcu mu oldum diyorum.
Peki öyle ama.
Bakıyorum solcular solcu değil. Sermayeyle yan yana. Ya IMF gelsin diye.
Aynen.
Biz IMF almayalım diye yayın yapıyoruz. Bunlar
Kahrolsun oligarşi diyenler patronlarla, baronlarla beraber